welcome to Thinking About with Amy Bray. My name is Alex and this is Isaac, and we are Year 9 students at South Bank University Academy. First of all, I would like to thank you all for coming. Amy Bray is a dedicated climate activist who's run many campaigns to raise awareness about the climate crisis, including founding a charity aged just 16. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please save your questions for then if possible. Please tell us a bit about yourself, Amy.
I'm Amy. I am a 20-year-old university student at the University of Exeter studying marine biology. And I also run environmental education charity Another Way, which I founded when I was 16. I've always been passionate about nature and our oceans. And when I was at school, I decided I wanted to do something to help conserve it because of issues like plastic pollution and climate change. So I started my journey of sustainable living and inspiring other people to do the same. So yeah, I am from the Lake District in Cumbria, which is right up in the north of the UK. And I, in 2019, was awarded Cumbria Woman of the Year for my work in the environmental sector. I'm also a committee member for the UN Ocean Decade of Science. And as I said, I'm a university student at the University of Exeter. So I'm sure we all know about the problems that are facing our planet because we're constantly bombarded with them in the media. But I'm just going to give a brief overview of climate change and plastic pollution and how they affect our everyday lives. So this is a graph that shows global energy use since the Industrial Revolution back in 1850. So you can see that it kind of is very steady. And then in the recent years, it's just shot up. And every year we increase our global energy use by about 2.5%, which is very unsustainable. But for me, this graph shows hope because this graph is our energy use that we use in our everyday lives, from driving to school, from turning the light on, from flushing the toilet, from eating food that's being transported around the world. We can actually have the power as individuals to change this curve around and to make sure that it stops growing year on year. So I think people often think of climate change as an issue of kind of the future and of somewhere else around the world. But we've all seen the effects of climate change in recent years, and it can be really, really scary. We've seen wildfires around the world in Siberia, Australia, even here in the UK because of increased temperature. This is a plaque to the first ever glacier that was lost to climate change in Iceland. So we are already seeing the effects of climate change. Of course, an issue very close to my own heart is our oceans, which are now clogged with plastic because of the amount of plastic packaging we use in our everyday lives, which finds its way into the oceans. And coral reefs are being bleached because of the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And then they become devoid of all the life and the colour and the sound that they once held. And the photo at the bottom there is the deepest point in any ocean, the Mariana Trench. And that's a photo that our patron took when he was down there in a submarine. And it shows plastic, even at the very bottom point of our oceans. And that could be plastic that you or I used in our everyday lives that has ended up there. And of course, in recent years in the UK, we've had catastrophic flooding, especially from my home in Cumbria. We see flooding on consecutive weekends some years, which can damage people's homes and jobs and businesses. This is a really interesting diagram which shows, it's quite complicated, but at the left here in the green bar, that is all the edible crops that we grow as a world, which is enough to feed the world 11 times over. And yet millions of people go hungry every year. And that's because of the amount of waste that we produce as a society. We also feed 90% of the crops that we could use to animals, which causes a huge inefficiency in our global food chain. So when we eat meat that we have fed with soybeans that we could have fed to humans, we've been really unsustainable. And this is another diagram which shows the carbon emissions per 50 grams of protein from different sources. So you can see at the top there, beef has a huge carbon footprint, whereas things at the bottom like peas and nuts and tofu have much, much smaller carbon footprint. We have produced enough plastic to wrap our world 2.5 times over in cling film since it was produced only 100 years ago. Every year, 12 million tons of plastic enter our oceans, and they are becoming clogged. Millions of animals die in our oceans every year from being suffocated by plastics. But ultimately, we waste too much. We waste our money on things that we don't need, the latest iPhone or the latest fashion trend. We waste our clothes, our plastic, we waste our food, and we waste our time worrying about things that don't really matter to us, worrying about our popularity or what items we own, instead of how happy we are and the people in our lives and how connected we are to nature. So what can we actually do about all these things? Because it's very, very easy to get overwhelmed by the extent of the problems facing our planet. I don't know about you, but sometimes I get really upset thinking about everything that we're doing to our world, thinking about these oceans clogged with plastic that used to be teeming with life. And it's sometimes really difficult to deal with, and I feel very frightened. But one thing that really helps is breaking it down into what you can do in your everyday life to really make a difference. So here are some ideas of things that I've done and that you can try too. And sometimes it's just about taking one step every week, and that can build up and build up. It doesn't have to be doing everything all at once, because none of us are perfect. But here are some ideas. So we can boycott palm oil. So oil palm plantations are the #1 cause of deforestation. That means that huge areas of rainforest are cut down and planted with one tree that produces these nuts that we use to make oil. And it's found in everything. If you walk down a supermarket aisle and pick up most of the things on that aisle, they will have palm oil in the ingredients. Everything from shampoo and toothpaste to biscuits. So always check the ingredients and try to avoid palm oil wherever you can. But personally, I think that avoiding processed products like snacks that come already wrapped is a great way of avoiding plastic packaging too. And instead, you can perhaps bake some cakes at home to take into school as a snack, and that can be healthier and fun for you too. We can reduce food waste. So I'm sure that many of us end up with fridges full of food that we haven't used, or perhaps at school you don't eat all your dinner. But there are steps that we can take to reduce our food waste, like only buying what we need and what we're going to eat, by eating our leftovers, or by using old vegetables in the fridge to make something like soup. And when we do produce food waste, we can compost it, which means that the microbes will break it all down and it won't release greenhouse gases like it would in landfill. You can get a home compost bin from your council usually, and you can just put it in your yard or your garden, and you can even get little worm bins to put in your kitchen if you don't have a garden at home. We can refuse single-use packaging. So I'm sure many of you today can think of at least a few items that you ate today that came in single-use plastic. So I challenge you to try and reduce that amount of single-use plastic that you're using every day. Back in 2015 it was now, so a rather long time ago, I challenged my family to go plastic-free. And that was probably the hardest thing we ever did. But we did it, and it was really difficult. but now it's a lot easier and a lot more people are doing it. Back then, my mum used to go into the greengrocers or the supermarket with her own container and ask people to put blocks of cheese in that instead of wrapping them up. And people used to look at her like she was an alien from outer space. But now they actually put signs up advertising that anyone can bring their own containers. So I feel that that just shows the power of an individual to really make a difference and to change a whole community's habits. So ways that we can reduce the packaging: we can make our own snacks, like I suggested earlier. We can make sure that we always carry a reusable bag, a water bottle, and a coffee cup. If you go and have a takeaway, you can take your own Tupperware container and some reusable cutlery so that you don't have to just get the packaging that can be thrown away after one use, because plastic stays here on Earth forever. You can also download the Refill app to help you to find places that you can refill your water bottle throughout the day. And perhaps you could go and visit your local zero waste shop. So a bit later on, I'm going to show you a picture of another way, which is the zero waste shop that I co-founded. But basically, you can fill up your containers with all these loose foods instead of buying them in plastic packaging. Fish. So unfortunately, over 80% of fish are overexploited, which means that they are caught at a higher level than they can sustain themselves. That means that we're going to lose much of our fish populations over the next few years. And 2 billion people around the world rely on fish as their primary source of protein. So that is catastrophic, not only for the environment, but for people as well. So it's really important that we all reduce the amount of fish we eat if we're privileged enough to do so. And when we do eat fish, we can try and research which are more sustainable species to eat. And generally, the rule is if you know the name of the species, it's probably not sustainable. So things like tuna, cod, they're really overfished. But other species that are smaller, like mackerel and herring, they're more sustainable. Also, unfortunately, shellfish like prawns are trawled, which means that huge fishing boats just drag nets over the bottom and tear up everything on the seafloor for only a small number of prawns. So they're really destructive to eat. So try and avoid those if you can. And perhaps you could talk to your friends and your family and inspire them to do the same. We can eat more plants. That's probably one of the best things you can do for the environment, is to eat more fruit and vegetables, which I'm sure your parents will like too. So meat and dairy, as I said, has a very big carbon footprint, and it also requires a lot of water and can pollute our oceans as well. There are ways that we can farm livestock that can help to improve the soil quality and biodiversity, but we all need to reduce the amount that we're eating in order to do that. So perhaps you could have a couple of meat-free days a week. Try some vegetarian recipes. There are loads online, or there are loads of cookbooks to get you inspired. Alex was telling me earlier he already organised a meat-free day at school, which is great. So that's something that you could all start doing. That would be really good, because if we all did that, then that would be part of the solution. Buy less stuff. So we are just buying so much all the time, whether it's clothes or toys or technology. And that's having a huge impact on our environment, because it takes a lot of resources to make all those things and to distribute them across the world. So every time you want to buy something, ask yourself, do I really need this? And if the answer is yes, then perhaps could I get it secondhand? There are loads of secondhand apps nowadays like Vinted or Depop or eBay, where you can get clothes and other items secondhand. You could also go to a charity shop or a vintage shop to find things secondhand as well. And if you can't do that, then can you find a recycled version or a more sustainable version made with sustainable natural materials? Sometimes that involves paying a little bit more, but it will last longer. So over time, the costs work out cheaper. One thing that we can all do that's super easy and you can start right now is use Ecosia instead of Google as your search engine. So on your phone, you can download the Ecosia app, and when you want to search something, use that, and it plants trees for every searches around the world. And we can also get involved in tree planting projects in your local community. If there are some going on, there are some great charities around the country that are doing great tree planting projects. So that's a really fun way to get involved. You could even try and get a tree planting project at your school. There are many charities that provide orchards to schools. So that's quite an exciting thing to have in mind. Flying abroad is really, really bad for the environment because it has a huge carbon footprint. So try to take public transport wherever possible, get the bus or the train, or even organise lift shares to school if you have to drive, or cycle and walk if you can. Now, this is a really interesting little diagram which shows the energy that you can get from a square metre of land in terms of miles. So at the top there, if we planted square metre of land with grass, and we harvested that grass and we turned it into petrol, and then we filled the car with petrol, we could go 5 miles. If we took that square metre of land and planted it with wheat and made the wheat into bread and ate the bread and then cycled, we could go 25 miles on that square metre of land. If we put a solar panel on that land and use the electricity to power an electric car, we could go over 1,000 miles on that energy. But if we use that solar energy to power an electric bike, we could go over 21,000 miles. So that's just the difference in energy efficiency from a conventional petrol car to a bike or an electric bike. Obviously, we don't have the power to buy a car at the moment, but if you can take the bike to school instead of getting a car, then that's going to be really, really good for the environment. Again, that's not really something we can do as young people, but we can talk to our parents about investing in renewables instead of in fossil fuels. So we can also buy local and seasonal food. So when you go into the supermarket, instead of buying things wrapped in plastic, choose the loose fruit and vegetables. Like sometimes, for some reason, there are bananas in plastic bags and bananas without plastic bags. So that's quite an easy choice that you can make. And also, as I mentioned earlier, making your own food reduces a lot of the packaging. But we can also buy seasonal food. So do some research into what grows at what time of the year. For example, things like berries are seasonal and grown in the UK in summer. In winter, it's not very sustainable to eat berries. So if you want some more advice on what you can do in your everyday lives, then you can go and become an Another Way household by completing our 30 steps program with your family. So that's just on our website. If you search Another Way, it will come up. And that will guide you through 30 things that you can do as a family to become more sustainable, from reducing the plastic in your bathroom to reducing your carbon footprint when you go on holiday, all sorts of things that can help you to be more sustainable. So what do we do as Another Way? Well, we have several projects. So the first is tree planting. Every year we get groups of children, farmers, local people involved in planting trees in our communities in Cumbria and in other parts of the country now as well. And this is such fun because we get people involved in digging holes, putting trees in there, and they can come back in 50 years' time and see those trees grow and provide a habitat for loads of different species. So that's something that I absolutely love doing. That's a highlight of my year. We also have our zero waste shops. So here are some photos of me, my family, and our manager at our zero waste shops in Cumbria. We have, as you can see, loads of different banks of food, over 150 different products that people can just come and buy however much they want of and put them in their own containers. So there's no waste involved. And like I'm doing now, I do awareness sessions and talks in schools and community groups, events and businesses all across the country, trying to inspire people to find another way, because sometimes we think, what can I do? But actually, if one person was to spread a message to 10 people in one day, and the next day, those 10 people each went away and talked to 10 more, and so on and so on, it would only take 10 days for the whole world to have been inspired. So no one's ever too small or insignificant to make change, because we all have the power to change how we live our lives and then to inspire those around us, our parents, our friends, our schools, our communities, the waiter that serves us a drink with a plastic straw in and we explain why we don't want it. We have that power to change all those people's lives. This is our patron that I was talking about earlier, who went in a submarine to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So he's quite a cool guy. We also run events that bring people together. So this was our launch event back in 2019, where we got 600 people to go up mountains in the Lake District and support Another Way. And they did all sorts of activities at the top, like dance. We had a brass band, and we all got very soggy because it was horrible weather. Now, this is something that you can all get involved in. This is our Another Way Ambassador Programme, which has just been renamed the Power of 10 after the mantra that I gave you just now. And this is going to be completely redeveloped over the next few months, so keep an eye on this. But you can sign up right now on the Another Way website to become an ambassador, and that will enable you to be part of a global community of young people making change in their communities. And you can have access to loads of resources from myself and young people around the world who have made change in their schools, their communities. There's things like a letter template to write to your MP, or advice on setting up an eco-council or running an event in your school, and recommended environmental programs for your school as well. So there's loads on here, and there's also a forum where you can meet other people who care and organize events and promote your own projects as well. But as I say, this is going to be completely redesigned. I'm very excited for how this is going to shape in the next few months. But I'd love you all to become a part of this community of young people who really care and are making a difference. So I just want to leave you with the fact that you can make a difference. And when this all feels very overwhelming and perhaps a little frightening, I found that there are at least a handful of people in every school, in every community, in every country who really do care and who really are making a difference, like all of you on this call today. So never feel too small. Remember that the world is at a crossroads. The alarm bells are ringing, but we all have a choice. We can bury our head in our pillow and go back to sleep and ignore it. Or we can wake up and we can face the day and we can do everything that we can to try and make a difference and to try to turn that curve around, to stop all these problems. And for every kind of plastic bottle that finds its way into the stomach of a whale, or for every half a degree of temperature rise, if you and I do twice as much good, 20 times as much good every day, and inspire those people around us to change their lives, to live more sustainably, then we can make a difference, and we can perhaps pay back some of what we owe this beautiful blue planet. But I think my number one piece of advice to all of you would be to play to your interests and your strengths and your passions, because there's room for all of us in the environmental movement. Whether you love art and you can make an art display about climate change and the environment and nature, or whether you like cooking and you could inspire people to cook more vegetarian food, or you like fashion and you can design some secondhand clothes and outfits. There's room for all of us, and you can use your strengths and your passions to make a difference in your school and your community. So go out there and find another way and become part of this community. And thank you so much for having me here today. And I challenge you all to go and think of 3 things that you can do to make a difference.
Okay, thank you for that excellent speech, Amy. I have got a question for you, and then I'll probably hand over to Isaac for his question. And my first question is, what would you say is the most effective campaign you have done?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I would say that my Devotion to Ocean campaign is probably the most effective. So that was where I went into schools and did an awareness session about plastic pollution, where I got people making a life-size albatross out of newspaper, and we made our own plastic-free glue out of flour and water. We play a game about microplastics in our ocean, and we bring in all the plastic that we've used in that week and pile it into the center of the room and see how much it is. But I've taken that awareness session to over 4,000 people now, and inspired them to reduce the amount of plastic that they've used. And I was missing about 2 days of school a week during sixth form to go into other schools to talk to them. So perhaps I don't recommend that, but I took that to a lot of people, and it inspired me a lot, because the hope that I get when I see all the enthusiastic young people that really do want to change is so powerful.
Thank you for that. I'm going to now let Isaac ask a question.
Thank you. So my question is, how much effect does plastics have on the environment?
So yeah, that's a good question. As I mentioned earlier, 12 million tons of plastic enter our oceans every year, and they never break down fully. So plastics are full of horrible chemicals, things like phthalates and BPA and fire retardants. I mean, I don't even know what any of those things are, so they're horrible things. But over time, plastics break down into smaller and smaller pieces, which are eventually called microplastics when they're really tiny. And those plastics can be eaten by the tiny animals at the bottom of our food chain called plankton. And those plankton eat lots and lots of plastic during their lifetime, but then the fish come along and eat the plankton and eat all of the microplastics that plankton had in it. And of course, every fish eats thousands and thousands of different plankton. So eventually the plastic builds up in their bodies, and when a whale comes along and eats the fish, then the whale gets even more plastic in its body. And that's called bioaccumulation of plastics in the food chain. And all the chemicals that were in those plastics can poison the animals at the top of our food chain. So the whales, the dolphins, the turtles, and it can cause infertility and cancer. So plastics have that chemical effect on animals in our food chain, but they also have the effect of when you have those big plastic bags. If a turtle comes along and mistakes it for a jellyfish, if it eats the plastic bag, then it can wrap itself around its stomach and it can cause starvation. So unfortunately, they have loads of bad impacts on marine wildlife. And I'm sure we've all seen photos of turtles with straws up their noses, or baby albatross chicks being fed plastic, because most marine animals can't tell the difference between plastic and their normal food. So a lot of animals feed plastic to their babies, which is pretty sad. So yeah, we need to get plastic out of our oceans.
Thank you. Now the next question over to Alex.
So my question is, do you have any advice to other campaigners? Like, what is effective and what should be a priority for those campaigners? What should they aim to do first?
So I think sometimes starting a campaign can be really overwhelming. I mean, I knew that I wanted to inspire people to make a difference, but I had no idea how. So when I first started, as I said, I was going plastic free myself at home. So I first started by making a social media account where I was posting what I was doing on there and inspiring other people to do the same by telling them what I was doing. And so that was just a really small step that I could take to raise awareness. And then I decided to go a step further, and I went into my school and I had conversations about how we can make the school single-use plastic free. I set up a little plastic free shop at break time, and I gave a talk to the whole school. And I started running events at school, and that gave me the confidence to then go into other schools. So I developed my Devotion to Ocean campaign, and I went into other schools to give that as well. So I think start with where you're familiar and confident, start with the people around you, and then just take it step by step and see where it goes. And I think that if you're passionate enough about something, that will always come across when you're speaking about it. But as I said earlier, it doesn't matter if you're not a great public speaker, you'll have other strengths, and there are so many different ways that we can solve the climate crisis. And we need everyone. So I think find what you're really interested in and find a way of using that to explain to people what's going on and how they can make a difference. But it's also really important, sorry to add this again, but I think it's really important to take time for yourself as well and to connect with nature, because you can be working on a campaign every day and tire yourself out and get really demotivated and upset. So it's super important to take time for you to have fun, to rest, to spend time with friends, and to spend time out in nature to remember actually what we are fighting for and what we love. You know, go for a walk in your local park, sit beneath a tree and read a book, go for a walk along a river, and that will really help to make you happy and to make sure that you don't burn yourself out as well.
Okay, thank you. Isaac?
Yes. My next question is, what do you think is the biggest issue climate-wise?
Wow, that's a big question. So actually, climate change is not the biggest threat facing our planet. It's actually land use and habitat use. So that means that we are using too much land for development, for housing, for roads, for agriculture, for factory farming. That is actually the biggest threat to species and wildlife on Earth. So what can we do about that? Well, we can eat more plants, we can reduce the meat we eat, we can also promote green spaces and parks. But in terms of actual climate change, just the rise in temperature is a great threat to species around Earth, because all species are adapted to living at quite a stable temperature. And unfortunately, a lot of the effects of increased temperature cause species to move. So we're seeing a lot of species in the ocean move further towards the Arctic or the Antarctic because it's got too hot around the equator. And that means that they will then be in the wrong place for their food, so they won't have enough food to eat. So there are huge, huge widespread impacts of climate change, and many of which we don't even know about.
Thank you. Now I'll pass the next question over to Alex.
So I'm now going to actually ask some questions from the audience. And the first question is, do you think everyone should be vegan?
I don't think everyone should be vegan. I think that if everyone wants to be vegan, they could. But I think that we all need to do our bit by reducing the amount of meat and dairy we eat, whether that's just by half. Personally, I'm vegan, and I know a lot of friends who are. And it is a lifestyle choice, and I love it, but it's a lot for some people. And so I think it's easier to take things step by step and to just challenge yourself to have a couple of vegetarian meals a week to start with. And maybe if you're comfortable with that and you enjoy that, then challenging yourself to like 3 vegan days a week and seeing where you go. But I don't think everyone should have to be vegan. It's already been shown that if everyone reduced their meat by 50%, then we would significantly reduce the carbon footprint of animal agriculture. So it's all about us doing little bits collectively.
Okay, so I hope that has answered your question. Isaac, do you want to read out the next one?
Yes. The next question is reducing plastic more important than combating climate change?
That's a good question. I personally think that thinking of things in terms of importance sometimes isn't very helpful, because by solving one thing, we can often solve lots of things at the same time. Plastic pollution, plastic comes from fossil fuels. So by reducing plastic, we're also reducing our carbon footprint. So for me, climate change is the biggest problem, but plastic pollution is a part of that. So we should be doing both at the same time and not arguing about which is most important, which is what a lot of scientists spend their time doing, which annoys me a lot. I think that, you know, in solving climate change, we can also solve biodiversity loss, we can solve plastic pollution, we can solve things like social injustice as well. So it's better to try and combat all these problems at once, I think.
Thank you. Alex, you want to go ahead
Okay,
now?
so that's all the questions from the chat at the moment. So the first I do have some other questions, and so does Isaac. Which one of them is, when did it click that you had started something big? Like, did you think you could do this at the start? And what made you think, yes, I can do this?
Good question. I think I doubted myself a lot at the start, especially because in my school, people did not care. They did not listen to me. People used to chuck plastic water bottles at me as I walked down the corridor. They were really horrible. And that was really difficult because I cared about this so much. I was very, very passionate, and I was just trying to make a difference. So yeah, there were times when I thought I'm never going to change anything. But then I started to go into other schools, and then suddenly people kept on bombarding me with requests to go into schools and talk at events. And I thought, hang on a minute, people actually do care about what I have to say, and they are valuing what I'm doing. And when I went into schools, and at the end I asked who was actually going to go away and reduce their plastic, and everyone put their hand up, that made me feel like I was making a difference, and people did care. So yeah, I think if you feel like you are hitting a brick wall and nothing is changing, then find another way of doing it. Take some rest, take some time for yourself, and then find a new audience or a new creative way of making a difference. And then it re-empowers you. But yeah, I still don't feel like I've done anything big, to be honest. I'm still constantly doubting myself. And when people at uni say they're intimidated by how much I've achieved, I don't see it like that. I've just taken it step by step, and I have inspired people like my 10 to the power of 10 mantra. You know, I've gone away and I've told 10 people, and they've told 10 more people. But yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Isaac, do you want to ask another question?
Yes. What do you think about fracking being allowed in the UK?
I am pretty angry about that. Yeah, it's shocking, really, because we can't transition to a sustainable, renewable future by extracting any type of fossil fuel, whether that's fracking, whether it's oil, whether it's gas, whether it's coal. We need to invest in renewables. We need to invest in wind and solar, not just trying to dig up fracking again. And it's going to end, it's not renewable, it's going to end in 30 years. And we only have, until 2050 to try and avoid the worst effects of climate change. That's not a long time, and that's not enough to be playing around with trying to frack again. So no, I believe that we need to fully invest in renewables, but I also get so frustrated with the government that I just think we've waited too long for them to change. We have to take things into our own hands and do everything we can in our own lives and in our communities to change, because it's not going to come from the top anytime soon, is it?
Okay, so another question quite relevant to the current period of time. How do you think the economic crash we're experiencing will affect our ability to reduce plastics or control the climate crisis? Because a lot of the cheaper food is wrapped in plastic packaging.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, it's been shown that it will only take 2.5% of global wealth to transition to a net zero economy. So that's not a lot of the UK's budget. And that will be much, much less than trying to deal with the effects of climate breakdown and of biodiversity loss. But on an individual scale, it can be really, really hard, as you say, to afford sustainable products if they're more expensive. But there's also a lot of things that we can do that are actually more affordable, like buying secondhand clothes, or making your own snacks, or repairing old toys or technology instead of buying new, or not flying. All these things are reducing our consumerism and so are therefore saving money in the long term. Also, things like trying to grow some of your own veg on the windowsill, that's a cheap thing that you can do at home to reduce your plastic use. But yeah, I think that sometimes people just have more to worry about. If we're trying to worry about how we're actually going to afford to feed ourselves, we're not going to be worrying about whether that food comes in plastic. So ultimately, I think that's about trying to campaign as individuals, to sign petitions, to ring companies, to try and get companies to also make it more affordable for us to be able to afford the sustainable options that we all want to.
Okay, thank you for that. Isaac, do you want to ask you a question, and then I will get to the question in the Q&A?
Now, going off track a little here, what do you think about the best ways to help solve the energy crisis coming from a climate aware standpoint?
Wow, we're going big here, aren't we? I think that we need to invest as a country in renewables, and governments need to stop subsidising fossil fuel companies to extract fossil fuels. They should instead be taxing fossil fuels and subsidising renewables. And they should all be building, new houses that are built should be insulated and should have solar panels on. I think it's disgraceful that new houses are being built still with no insulation, still with reliant on oil or gas. It's shocking. So I think a lot of energy and investment has to go into insulation and into financing renewables and taxing fossil fuels. I don't think it's that complicated, really, but the government seems to be doing a good job of making it seem that way. And we also need to reduce our energy use. That curve I showed you at the start of energy use going like that and increasing exponentially, that's not going to be sustainable if we want to get all our energy from renewables, because eventually the whole world's going to have to be covered in solar panels to meet our energy demand, especially if we are transitioning to electric cars and everything's becoming electric. So it's also about us as individuals and as communities reducing our energy use through turning off the light switches, turning off the kettle, trying to boil your saucepans with a lid on. There's lots of things that we could do to reduce our energy demand as well, so that we can get all of our energy from renewables. I hope that answered your massive question.
So I've now got one more question from the chat, and I think then we will finish up for the day. And the question from the chat is, what ambitions do you have for the future?
Nice question. So I am graduating from university next year, and then I've been asked to write a book. So that's one of my personal ambitions, which is going to be really hard and scary, but I'm looking forward to that. And then I would also personally like to do a PhD, so I become a doctor in marine biology. So that's another personal ambition of mine. For another way, I want to grow so that we can employ more staff. I want to get money for a director, and I want to reach a national audience, especially with our Ambassador Power of 10 programme, so that I can really support all these incredible young people that are doing things in their schools around the UK and around the world. And then on a global level, I would like everyone to make every decision based on compassion for themselves, for the planet, for people around the world. And that is what I will continue to strive for.
Okay. So thank you for your really inspiring and interesting talk. I hope I can have a positive impact just like you. Thank you to everyone who asked questions, and to the Dulwich College and the SSLP for organising this talk. Next week, we will be thinking about Black history with the Baroness Floella Benjamin. Please join us then. Goodbye.